Today's session, of course, is all about how Agile principles can be implemented. We have received numerous questions on this topic over the years, and I'm really happy to introduce Aaron Morris, the founder of Agile Innovations. Aaron's background is in software engineering, and he has worked within life sciences industry for 17 years. Yeah. And he specializes in helping FDA-regulated software teams modernize their development while complying with industry regulations. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Monica. I appreciate the invite, and I love talking about all things Agile. I've been doing it for a very long time now.
Yeah. How's your experience been? How are your customers or the companies that are working with you, does the Agile principle come easily for them? Are they easily understanding how they need to be working within Jira and Confluence?
It is easy to understand with the right guidance. So anybody that's been through the Agile transformation, there's a learning curve to it. There's a lot of trial and error, but these days you can skip a lot of the learning curve and a lot of the trial and error by following the guidance of people that have been through it already. And so now I think that at this point, the hardest part is just continuously communicating within your organization. So once you learn it, then you have to keep communicating to everybody else in your organization and help them learn it too, because there are paradigm shifts, right? That's really the only impediment. There's just paradigm shifts to how to work. Especially the more experienced you are, the bigger the paradigm shift is for you.
Definitely. I was just thinking that having a kind of a paper-based or Excel-based experience before, and a very thorough one of that, you will be needing to kind of learn new language, because this is or new ways of working, right? So to apply the Agile principles. But in your experience, how long does it usually take for the team to turn their ways of working according to the new principles?
It's a gradual process, and it's best done as a gradual process. And so one example of that is it's common to start with a pilot project, sort of a pilot team that starts the transition ahead of everybody else. And then even that pilot team's transition is going to be gradual. So the initial transition, of course, you have to adopt a bit of Agile practices. You don't have to go completely Agile all at once. And then once you sort of do that first initial adoption, then through the Agile improvement process, you just continuously become more Agile as it makes sense for your team and for your organization, right? Because that's one of the key principles of Agile, is to adapt it to your needs, adapt it to your organization. So to answer your question, the initial might take a few months, right, to just get that pilot team up and running with all the processes that they need. But the entire transformation should take quite a long time, right? Because you want it to be a gradual learning process. You don't want to change 100% all at once. That's going to fail.
Definitely. And is it also possible that not all the processes are Agile at first, but you add these incrementally to your team as well? Yeah.
Correct. Exactly. As an example, the first transformation that I participated in, I was working inside a medical device company. It's a long time ago, maybe at least 15 years ago. And the way we adopted Agile is we left our deliverables exactly the same, so that QA didn't even necessarily need to worry that we were Agile, because it didn't change our output at all. But the way we developed the output was more Agile than initially. So exactly, you don't go all Agile all at once. You sort of do it gradually, slowly change your processes, slowly change your outputs, and how you manage things.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I know that you have prepared some slides and some demo session for us today. And I don't want to keep any more time from the demo session, because these are always hurried a bit. And I want to have as much time as possible for you actually showing.
If I may interrupt, we already have one question that I think would be great to take before we kick off the presentation. The question is about, do you think that the Agile methodology could also be used on RAQA tasks, not just for development?
Regulatory.
The short answer is yes, right? You can manage any function inside an Agile management framework, right? And just the basic principles of Agile, working iteratively, working in smaller chunks, and getting feedback along the way, frequent feedback, right? That's applicable to any job function in the organization.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. I thought it was a great question to after Monica's question about, like, if you are not an Agile team, how long it takes to go Agile. But what if you're an Agile team that goes into medical device development, what they need to do, and how long that takes.
Yeah.
And also, of course,
yeah, yes, that learning curve is on the other side of things. It's all in the output and making sure you're producing all the correct
but I believe
artifacts.
the learning curve for the software engineers to understand what outputs do the quality and regulatory team need. This is also quite a topic of its own, I believe. But the floor is all yours, Aaron. And we intend to have the questions in the end, or maybe after the slides before you jump into the demo. We can also have a couple of questions then if somebody's interested.
Great. So this presentation is on Agile risk management, and this exists inside the larger context of doing Agile development inside a regulated industry. I know that we have different experience levels with that represented here, so I'm going to try to present this in a way that will not lose anybody, regardless of their experience level. But the focus here is, of course, on risk management. We want to show using SoftComply Risk Manager Plus inside Jira Cloud and using those tools together to implement an effective Agile risk management process inside that larger Agile development process. And the benefits of doing this are on the screen here. And just to run through them quickly, why should you care about doing risk management in a more agile way? And the short answer is because your output is going to be much better. You're going to do a much better job with risk management. And the reasons for that are on the screen. I'll let you sort of read through them. But the key is that because Agile promotes cross-functional collaboration, obviously you're going to build cross-functional teams. Usually, regardless of whether you have a cross-functional team, you're going to collaborate with cross-functional stakeholders. And the more skill sets you have represented in your collaboration, the better your risk analysis and mitigation is going to be. That's pretty obvious. And then because you're working in iterations, whatever Agile methodology you choose, because Agile works in iterations, works in small chunks, and because it encourages you to collaborate with your stakeholders and solicit feedback after each chunk. The most common in a framework that we'll show in this demo is, after each sprint, you're going to get feedback on how your risk management is going much more quickly and much more often, right? And so that is going to also significantly improve your risk management, because every couple of weeks, as you're developing small features, you're going to show those to your stakeholders, and they are going to give you feedback on the safety and usability of what you're building. Whether they realize that that's what they're commenting on or not, that's what they're going to help you with. And so this rapid feedback, this close collaboration, these small iterations, this all promotes a much higher level of risk management, much more thorough risk management than you probably have already. And then if you implement your process correctly, which I will show you how to do today, you'll also have fantastic traceability. That's why I like to work inside Jira Cloud, because of the traceability that you can build across your entire SDLC, and then includes the traceability between your risk items and all of your requirements and test evidence and everything else, which makes auditing just so much less painful, so much easier. Trying to change slides here. There we go. Compliance. I know we're all very concerned about compliance. So these are a few of the standards that the process will show today are compliant with. And what we are going to focus on is the last box. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the first two boxes, 14971 for risk management and IEC 62304 for your software development lifecycle. But the last one, which people are less familiar with, AAMI TIR 45, this is a technical information report that shows you how to implement an agile process that is compliant with these other processes. If you're familiar with 62304 as one example, it gives you a lot of things that must be inside your lifecycle, your software development lifecycle, but it does not prescribe a framework. It does not care if you're using waterfall or agile or anything. It just, as long as you have your processes, then you are satisfy the standard. AAMI TIR 45, it shows you how to take those lifecycle processes and fit them into an agile model. And you can see here that TIR 45 is written specifically for the medical device industry, but it is applicable, or I should say useful to any regulated industry, whether you're inside medical device or pharmaceutical or financials or aerospace. Any regulated industry, it is useful because the agile framework it describes is universally useful, sorry, across any of these industries. And so you'll see that in just a moment. So diving in a little bit deeper. So AAMI TIR 45. TIR 45 is not an extremely large document, roughly 100 pages or so. It describes a lot of different things, but what we want to focus on is just what does this framework look like that it gives us for managing agile, managing our regulatory processes, our development processes in a compliant way inside an agile model. And there's two important concepts to learn to understand just the basic framework from TIR 45 that you can apply across industries. The first concept is this idea of layers. So you can see that this has a product layer, a release layer, an iteration or increment layer, and a story or backlog item layer. And so it divides the processes across these layers. So you're going to manage a product over time, and the way you manage your product is through one or more releases, probably a lot of releases over the years. Each release is going to consist of one or more agile increments, probably sprint. Sprint is the most common form of an agile increment. And then each increment or sprint is going to contain multiple backlog items that you work on, stories. And you'll notice there's all these processes with numbers shown inside these different layers, the story layer, the increment layer, and so forth. These are actual mappings to IEC 62304. So this is a great example of showing how you can take the processes from one of the larger standards and organize them into an effective agile framework. So understanding these layers is important, and we'll use these layers as we go through the demo.
Yeah, Aaron, I have a quick question here.
Please.
We've heard also from our quality managers that they are a bit concerned on requirements and risks being defined at the story level because the input from the developers is just not sufficient for them. So how would you go about with this challenge?
Great question. I think we're going to see a little bit of that as we go through the risk management process today. But the key here is that the answer to your question is that your requirements analysis starts at the highest level and kind of works its way down to the story level, right? And so you're not only doing requirements analysis at the story level, you're going to do it at higher levels, but you don't see it in this diagram because you're not going to really do requirements analysis as part of your sprint output or your release output. You're going to do it as part of your backlog management. And so you're gonna have plenty of requirements analysis involving all of your stakeholders as you manage your agile backlog before your developers work on it. And this is the process of taking a feature request, decomposing it into epics if it's large enough for that, and then taking your epics and decomposing them into stories. That entire agile backlog management process involves a great deal of effective requirements analysis involving your stakeholders. Okay. So let's, so the next key that I want to show here, though, from a process output perspective, the second takeaway is that you can see that most of these processes are packed into the story layer. This is sort of what you just touched on a little bit, Monica. You can see that they're intentionally pushed down into the story layer. And so you're going to do as much work as possible at the story or backlog item layer. This is from an output perspective. And then you're going to do some more at the sprint layer and some more at the release layer and some more at the product layer. But you're going to push as much of this down to the story layer as possible. And this is a critical concept for an effective Agile adoption. And this is counterintuitive to how we're used to working. Most of us are probably accustomed to doing most of these processes, these output processes, at the release layer, at that higher level layer. And that works great, but that will impede your Agile adoption. And so that's the second thing that we're going to see as we go through this demo, is just this idea of doing a lot of our output work at the story layer, and then which leaves less work to do at the sprint and release layers. And the release layer being the biggest transformation, because today you probably do most of your stuff, most of your outputs at the release layer. And to really highlight this, here's the key to managing your Agile process in a compliant way. Agile is built on the definition of done. Definition of done is the key concept. And as you're learning to work with a definition of done, Agile promotes the concept of done is done. And what that means is done, when you have a story and you move it to the last column in your sprint board, which might be labeled done, done doesn't just mean developer done. It doesn't mean the code is working and queued up for testers. Done means that you have done as much process as possible on each story. That's what we just saw in the last diagram. So the key here is to make your stories as small as possible from a functionality perspective, as long as they're still useful. You got to provide real value. You don't want to go so small that they're not useful. But you want to expand or maximize the amount of process that you do. That includes verification, that includes reviews and approvals, documentation, all this stuff, and it includes risk management, as we'll see in this demo. And the reason why you want to do this is because reducing functional scope is what creates those shorter feedback cycles that we talked about at the beginning. And then an expanding process scope is how you achieve that agility, that near ready to release state that Agile promotes without sacrificing compliance, because you're doing your compliance work throughout. It's baked into your process. It's not this super long checklist that takes several months at the end of your release. You're doing your compliance work all the way throughout. You just have a little bit of work to do at the release time, and you're going to be fully compliant. So these are the principles, taking those same principles, applying them in Agile Risk Management. This is all taken from TIR 45. I think we kind of talked about this already. And we'll see this in action. But you can see, follow the done is done principle, and do as much of your risk management activities as you can with the completion of each story, the completion of each sprint, and the completion of each release. Here's a better view, a more graphical view. So in this diagram, we have our 4 layers that we just talked about. We have the product layer at the top, the release and iteration layers, and then that story layer. And you can see how you can manage this sort of circular, agile lifecycle for managing risks specifically. So this diagram specifically addresses risk management. And so at the product layer, you're going to maintain your backlog of work that you need to do, stories, epics, features, and you're also going to maintain living documentation. The minimum is a living risk register, a risk register that you maintain for the life of your product. You might also have, depending on your, if you're a medical device team, you might have a post-market surveillance plan, and other risk documents, plans, and things that must be maintained over the life of the product. That's what you're doing at the product layer. Then as you go through your backlog management, your Agile backlog management, a key part of your backlog management is to identify hazards, do your risk analysis continuously all the time as part of your backlog management. Down at the story layers where you're actually going to implement risk controls. You're going to approve the residual risk as you implement risk controls, and then coming back out on the closure side of things, as you close each iteration, you're going to review your risk register for consistency, review other living documents for consistency. And then at the release layer is where you don't just review, but you also approve baselines of those things. So you have audit-ready release reports. This is what our risk register looked like when we released, version 1.1 10 years ago, et cetera. And then the process continues. So this is the agile process that we sort of saw in the last several slides applied directly to risk management. And with that, we are going to move into a live demo in Jira. Just want to introduce the demo scenario. So my Jira demo environment is configured to have a fictitious backlog and requirement specification and test suite and things for something called a remote diagnostics and service utility that is used to remotely monitor and service these contrast injection systems that might be deployed in hospitals around the world. So this is a high-risk piece of software that we can build compliantly in an agile process. And as a side note, the reason why I like to use this as a demo scenario, this is modeled after an application that I did actually work on for real many years ago. So it helps me keep things realistic. This is one of my favorite projects that I worked on in my career, and so it keeps the demo a little bit more realistic if I use some real world type subject matter. And in this particular demo, we have a new feature request coming in where we want to monitor these devices right over here. We want to monitor these devices and detect calibration drift as it happens so that we can intervene and recalibrate these devices sooner than just once a year, whatever the routine service interval is. So we want to do calibration drift detection, which is a high-risk feature, and we're going to see how we might manage the risk in an agile way as we implement it. And if there are no important questions, we will jump into Jira now.
Aaron, there is one question actually that goes into the slide 5 and 6, I think, or is related to those. It's about documents. So when you say story layer has all the steps necessary, then should we also have evidence like documents per story, or is the technical file targeted only for every release?
Great question. So as you'll see, the story level documentation is mostly built by building up your data inside Jira. So that's the advantage of using a digital tool like Jira. So you don't necessarily so for the most of your documents won't need to be updated per each story, because the data that's used to automatically populate those documents will be produced and reviewed and approved at the story layer. Some documents you might there's different ways of handling this in the real world. Some documents you might need to update in a much more traditional manual manner before you release, and how you go about doing that, you have different options. You can update them continuously for each story and then just approve, kind of review as you go and then do your final approval with each release. You're not going to reapprove a document with every single story. That's wasted effort. But you could try to maintain your documents in a sort of current state with each story, or you could take the output from your stories and then do all of your updates at a later time. In practice, the strategy that I found for, policies and procedures and admin guides and all those sorts of documents that are manually written, the best strategy or the most success that I've had in real practice is to make fast sort of tentative updates to them with each story. So the developers or whoever's responsible will make those fast updates at the story level so that you don't forget any updates. But the updates aren't going to be very good, meaning the voice is going to be inconsistent because you have so many people making the updates and people just aren't in a document writing mindset. So then you sort of clean the documents at the release level before you reapprove them for your release output.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron, for that. We have some more questions, but we leave them to the end as to the question, what goes into a risk register? That is, I think, exactly what we're going to see next. So,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move over to Jira, and we're going to try to quickly go through. We're going to cover a lot of ground really fast. Feel free to ask questions if I'm moving too fast, but Jira allows you to sort of create a hierarchy of work, which is really helpful for this backlog management activity where we want to do our requirements analysis and we want to do our risk analysis, which is really what we're focusing on in this demo. And so if you happen to have like a timeline set up here, I just want to show that, Jira allows you to sort of create these high-level company initiatives that then may be broken down into projects, broken down into epics, and so forth. And because this feature that we're looking at in this demo is such a big feature, we're actually going to pretend that this is a new project that came in. So implementing this feature, this is big enough to be a project. And when this comes in, so here's our feature request. Here's a lot of the details. You're going to collaborate with the requester to flesh out these basic details of what is this feature that we're implementing, what's the value that we want to get from it. And then as you go through this, you're going to do requirements analysis on this feature, and you're also going to do risk analysis. The first step in your risk analysis will be to just, what is the broad risk impact? What are the categories of risk that are relevant to this feature request? And this sort of helps you start to train the team to start thinking about, okay, do we need to worry about safety for this feature request? Yes, definitely. Do we have to worry about cybersecurity? Maybe. So we'll just select it for now. Do we have to worry about regulatory compliance? Maybe not directly here. Maybe Part 11 is relevant. Maybe Part 11 is not. Those are the types of things there. Definitely have to worry about usability. Point is, you can manage all your different types of risks through the same Agile process. And of course, many of the hazards that you identify might be relevant to one or more risk categories. But this sort of trains the thinking and already gets you thinking like, oh, this feature has safety implications. It might have cybersecurity implications. It has usability implications. And then you can go through and do a high level. As you're doing your high-level requirements analysis on this feature, you can also do a high-level risk analysis, and you can start to enter your risk items as your hazards into Jira as items to be managed. And so I've already created them just to sort of save time, but I'm going to link them. We'll pretend that we're creating them right now. So we're going to say that this creates a few hazards. This is going to create a lot of hazards in practice, right? This is a very risky feature, but let's just highlight a few high-level risks that we've identified. All right, so I think I'm looking at the wrong notes. I attached the wrong risks. Let me fix this. All right, so let's go back up. So I'm using Jira's native linking feature. I have a link type called creates hazards, and I can link the correct things, and I can start to link these new risks that we're identifying. So there's lots of risks that we're going to identify as we go through our high-level risk analysis, but maybe there's just a couple that we'll do for this demo. And this calibration drift feature might have false negatives and false positives, which could impact the serviceability of the device. So we'll create these hazards. You'll notice that you can create a special issue type in Jira for your risk hazards, and you can have all the fields necessary to satisfy whichever risk standard that you are trying to comply with. This is compliant with 14971, and kind of go through and say, all right, so what are the, what's the hazardous situation, what's the harm, all these things. And then we can use Risk Manager Plus to complete our risk assessment. So we might say that this is a critical severity with an occasional probability, and Risk Manager Plus, based on the risk model that we have configured for this project, will say that this is a high risk. Then you can start to talk about mitigations, right? So you say, well, how are we going to mitigate this? You can link the mitigations to this hazard, and then you can tentatively complete your residual risk. So let's say that in order to mitigate the possibility of a false negative, we want to implement a mitigation. Here we go. Is mitigated by, and we'll just implement, we'll add a new feature to our backlog to say that, we can mitigate this feature by having this new feature automatically checked as part of our device's self-checkout routine. We don't need to get into the details of this exact scenario, overthink things. But the point is, you can see how I'm building the sort of end-to-end traceability, right? So if I go all the way, I can work my way backwards. So here's a new feature that's added to my backlog. This feature mitigates a risk, and this risk was introduced by our new feature request. So already, just in this high-level risk analysis, we're already building our traceability, our risk traceability out. And so these are new hazards, and we can also link existing hazards. If we already have hazards in our system that we've already mitigated, but we know that they are relevant to the, relevant to this feature, then we can add these existing hazards too. So here's an existing hazard related to cybersecurity. This comes up here. There it is. So there's a cybersecurity hazard, but this one's already been mitigated. We don't necessarily need to do any more work for it, but we can still show that it's relevant to this feature so that people are thinking about it as they decompose. Okay, so this is your high-level risk analysis at the feature level. You're going to do requirements analysis too at this level also, going to that question from earlier. Then as you go through your next level of backlog planning, you're going to decompose this feature into epics, right? And so we can create some epics for our feature. I have these all pre-created. We just need to link them up. I don't know what just happened there. Oh. That's creating new ones. I don't want to do that. So I'll go a different way here. That's no problem. So we can just go through here. We'll find one of our stories. We'll decompose this into different stories, and you can see how we can add. There we go. You can see how we can decompose this project into epics and sort of keep going from there and decompose this. And then as you go into each epic, right? Let me add another one here. As you get down to the epic level, you're going to repeat your risk management process, right? So you're going to say, okay, what's the impact of this epic? And say that this epic, which is automatically scheduling our calibration service, this has usability and safety implications. And then we can go through the same process as before and link hazards at this sort of epic level. Link issues. Let's create some new hazards. Hopefully I'm not going too quickly for anybody here. All right, so you see, as we get to lower and lower levels in our backlog, we're going to do lower and lower level hazard analysis, lower requirements analysis, lower hazard analysis. So as you go through your Agile requirements process, you're also going to go through your Agile risk management process. Then each hazard gets decomposed into stories and so on and so forth, right? So if we could go down to the story level here, we can continue to introduce hazards, and these hazards are going to be even lower level hazards probably than the higher level hazards that we identified previously. And all of these hazards are going to automatically show up in our risk register so that we can be certain to mitigate them through additional backlog items as needed. So let's just link up a few hazards here and sort of show. So link up a few more, right? So at every level, feature level, epic level, story level, I'm linking hazards that can be mitigated. The other thing that's important here with at the story level, though, is you might not actually but as you identify hazards at the story level, you might address them through additional acceptance criteria inside the story itself, or you might create additional backlog items that you'll work on later. For the feature and epic level, you're just pretty much always introducing backlog items to represent your risk mitigations. But just to show that at the story level, some of these acceptance criteria might be risk mitigations for the hazards that we have identified below. So this is sort of the planning side of Agile risk management, right? So I'm going to jump back to the timeline here and refresh this. And the reason why I want to show the timeline here is because this shows me the full hierarchy of what's going on. Here's my feature request. Feature request gets decomposed into one or more epics. Epics get decomposed into stories, and we're associating risk hazards at every level in this hierarchy and managing these risks at every level in the hierarchy from a planning perspective to make sure our backlog contains everything it needs to contain for risks as we identify them. All right, so I think we can move on. The next thing you're going to do with a story, though, as you sort of go through this this process here, for stories, you're also going to assign them to releases, and you're going to assign them to your iterations, right? And so now let's pretend that we are in sprint mode. So here's this new story that we just created. Fast forward here, right? We're in the middle of a sprint. We have a lot of different work going on for a lot of different things. And now we can move this story through that agile process that we talked about, where we're going to do we're going to do as much of our end-to-end process as we can at the story level. And so that means as we go through, we're going to do low-level requirements analysis. If we need to, we're going to ensure that all of our tests are written. We're going to execute all of our tests and verify this. We're going to do a demo for a product owner and get usability feedback and all the feedback that we need to from a product owner, all before the story makes it to the done column. So we're going to maximize our agile process on the story. We're going to maximize our compliance processes as it moves across the agile agile swim lane, right? And so you see in progress, do all your work, ready to test, ready for software quality assurance, right? You're going to move it through as much process as possible so that by the time it reaches the end, this piece of functionality is really close to actually being ready for release, right? Just a little bit more work to do at the higher level, but you've done so much testing, so much risk management. We obviously don't have time to do an agile implementation here. So we're going to fast forward and let's look at a story that's already done, okay? And just show what that sort of traceability looks like. So here's a story that's at the end of the swim lane. We're still inside a sprint. This story is done. It's approved. And let's look at how much process has happened on this. So this has not only been implemented in the code, right? This has been linked up to the requirement specification items that were either created or revised as we implemented this new functionality. Our test cases are written, our test cases are executed. We have a test run with all of our test evidence. So a full end-to-end process was done on the story, and then we've even done a we've even put the story through its own little quality checkout. So this story is basically a miniature change package that has a lot of end-to-end process on it. And so this is what I meant by, you're sort of building out your release documentation as you go, because all of this is going to get populated into our requirements traceability matrix and our requirement specification baseline, all that stuff. And we know that that stuff is going to come out very good because we're doing these low-level reviews and approval as we go. Now, again, we're focused on Agile risk management. So let's look at the risk management that happened on the story. So we saw what it's like to link hazards up at the beginning. As you go through the story, you're going to implement the mitigations as needed and improve the residual risk. So let's look at one of these risk hazards, right? So this risk hazard has a mitigation, but this mitigation is actually done, right? And so we have our mitigation implemented, and we have our residual risk reviewed. We have our residual risk approved with signatures. And if we dive into this mitigation, we can actually follow it through test coverage and see exactly where we tested it at and what was the and where's the test evidence and all those things. So the key here is that we now have this complete end-to-end traceability from a high-level feature request down through the story where we actually implemented a piece of functionality for that feature request, down through requirement specifications, and risk hazards, and down to the test evidence that verifies our requirements and verifies our risk mitigations. So your in-sprint process in this Agile framework that you can apply across industries to remain compliant. The in-sprint thing is to maximize your process here, create this traceability, and do your reviews. Get feedback from your stakeholders as you're developing and approving these things. All right, so coming back out, right? So if you remember from the diagram before, we implemented our we did our backlog management, did all of our risk analysis as we go. We're implementing stories. We're doing risk management as we implement the stories. We're updating our risk assessments as the implementation plays out, as we get smarter about how things are actually implementing, and eventually you're going to start to come back out of things. So once the sprint is over, we're going to do end of sprint activities. What kind of things might we do at the end of the sprint? We're going to do things like two critical activities. We're going to review our risk register. So SoftComply, if we're using Risk Manager Plus and go to our risk management feature, we can view our risk table. This is a living document. And we can, at the end of every sprint, we can review this risk table and see, how are we doing? What have we mitigated? What do we still have left to do? How's our residual risk coming along, right? So this is our living document. And then optionally, if we want to, we can create a baseline of this, whether by exporting it to PDF or importing it to Confluence, like I'll show you next. You can create a baseline of this optionally at the sprint level. So that's one thing you're going to do at the sprint level is review this document and any other living documents and just maintain consistency. Look for problems, look for work that needs to be done added to the backlog. The other thing you're going to do is a demo to your stakeholders. That's a traditional Agile ceremony, to do a sprint demo. And in a risk management context, your sprint demo is going to generate feedback about your safety and about your usability primarily, about other risks too. But you're going to get a lot of feedback about safety and usability. So this is your sprint thing. And then as you complete multiple sprints, we go through sprint 6, and then we go through sprint 7, sprint 8, however many sprints are in our release. Eventually, we're going to make it to release time, where we now are going to do those same sort of demos. We're going to do the same, we're do some additional testing as needed. We're going to do additional risk analysis as needed, check things for consistency. But very importantly, we're also going to create baseline exports that get routed for approval. So if you're using a traditional document management system, this is where you'll review this risk register, make sure it's ready for release, right? This one obviously is not because I'm still in the middle of a release. But if we pretended that it was, then I could do an export and route this for approval in my document management system. Or if you're using Confluence, SoftComply gives us some great tools. I just jumped over to my Confluence space, and you can, that same risk table we just saw inside Jira, this is Jira, go over to Confluence, you can display the same exact risk table, but then you can put it on a Confluence page. You can use the static snapshots utility to create a snapshot, a static snapshot of this table so that it will not change even as your Jira data changes. And then you can route this for approval inside Document Manager and apply signatures. And so then this becomes one of your release artifacts, not your only release artifact, but this is your primary release artifact as it relates to risk management. You're also going to have a requirements traceability matrix, and you're going to route that for approval either here in Confluence or your document management system, whatever you have. You're going to have a requirement specification. You're going to have a baseline of your requirement specification. Here's all the requirements in our system, all the test summary report for all the testing you did, all that stuff. You're going to approve it at the release level. That's how you have audit readiness over time. It doesn't matter if Jira changes. You're going to have a baseline of all your documents for audit readiness over the years. And from a risk management perspective, it's going to be your risk register primarily. There was a question about what's inside the risk manager or the risk register. If you're following 14.971, you're going to have a list of risks with a description of them and with an assessment of their severity and their severity probability, initially severity probability for residual, and then how did you mitigate them? What's the status of the mitigation and so forth? That's your, but that's for 14.971. There's lots of different formats for a risk register, depending on the type of risks you're managing and depending on the industry that you are operating in. And so if I sort of try to bring this back full circle to our process here, hopefully this is what we just demonstrated. Maintaining your backlog, your Agile backlog, maintaining your living documentation, doing risk management as part of your risk analysis as part of your backlog management, right? And so as you get to lower levels in your backlog, you're getting into more granular thinking from a requirements perspective and more granular thinking from a risk analysis perspective. And then at the story level is where you actually start to implement those controls that you identify, those mitigations, review your mitigated risk, and then kind of come back up and maintain your living documentation, continuously review for consistency, continuously solicit feedback from your stakeholders, but then only do formal approvals on these documents at release time, and then repeat the process.
Wow, thanks, Aaron. It's been actually a quite intense chat as well, and the Q&A session was, while you were sharing your screen. We didn't want to interrupt you at all because it's kind of you need to stay in the flow, right? But but some of the technical questions I hope we managed to answer that are related more to kind of Jira's own core features and also the ability to create custom fields, because Jira is planned for software development. It doesn't know that in hazard assessment we need fields for harm and hazardous situation and all these additional things. And also we answered some of the questions like that you are using additional tools on top of your Jira, like Risk Manager Plus you mentioned, and also the signature app on Jira side. By the way, do you feel like we often hear from our customers that they are more wanting to keep Confluence side, the final truth on documentation and approvals there? So how do you feel? Do you feel like also that in Jira, the official approvals, the electronic signatures should be applied, or can it be all done on the reporting side in Confluence?
It can be done on, so the best strategy, the strategy you just saw in this demo, is to do it in both places. And it's not redundant. It's just two different levels of signatures, right? And that's the best strategy. I'll dive a little bit deeper in just a second. But if you're only going to do one, it has to be on the Confluence side or your document management, whatever your document management system is, right? Of course, we're showing Confluence because that works so well with Jira.
Yeah.
But whatever your document management system is, that has to be where the final approval is. Your final high-level approvals will not happen in Jira. I have seen some implementations where people have sort of made it work that way, but it doesn't work it works, but not quite as well. But going back to this, right? So the advantage to this sort of hybrid approach of doing your signatures in both places is there are different kinds of signatures. So using this risk register as an example, as each of these hazards is mitigated and the residual risk is approved, you're doing a low-level quality check and approval on each line item, so that by the time you get to this higher level approval on the overall version 1.2, as an example, snapshot of your risk register, you know that each of these line items has already been reviewed by subject matter experts, right? So you can do, you don't have to be in the detailed mindset when you're doing this higher level review. But if you're only going to do one, it has to be the higher level review. It's harder to get away with only doing a lower level approval without the higher level approval. Some companies do it. I'm not going to say it's not compliant, but I will say it's less effective. And this strategy, though, it's across the board. Your requirement specification. We all know what it's like to review a requirement specification with 200 requirement changes in it. You don't do a good review, right? But if you're reviewing those requirements individually as you go, in the context of the changes as they're implemented, then you're going to do a very good SME review on your individual requirement changes. And then when you do your high level requirement approval at the end of the release, you can do it in a different mindset. You can apply the high level signature. And now you're just at this level, you're just worried about the consistency of everything. You know, the details of each of these items has already been covered and already been reviewed. And it's good because you don't want to find detailed problems at this time. This is what delays releases. If there's a detailed problem with this particular risk hazard, this is too late. You wanted to define this 2 sprints ago, and you did find it 2 sprints ago, which is why this, which is why this line item is already ready.
We have a few questions here in the Q&A that some of them are a little bit similar. So I'm going to go with one about how to find balance between agility and compliance. One is like, what is the most difficult part of that? And the other one is how to basically motivate developers also do documenting, any practical tips in getting software developers also respect and do compliance tasks. So a big, very loaded question. So whatever pops in your mind, really.
Yeah, it's an extremely loaded question. It's something I have a great deal of experience with. Being a developer and having spent so much time inside developer teams, it can be a great mindset and cultural shift depending on what your developers are used to. Because in a lot of organizations, yes, they're used to the idea of I finished my code, done is done. I want to move on to the next thing. Especially when you're developer in development mode, you don't want to have to switch mindsets. You don't want to have to do it. So the answer is do it. You can implement this gradually, right? So going back to, I'm going to switch screens, I think, and go back to, by the way, as a side note, this is a risk management checklist that sort of details the entire process that I just rushed through. And so you can follow along with this checklist.
Yeah, and the link is in the chat, so you can download that after the webinar as well.
Thank you for that. But going back to this slide here, right? So as you expand, you can this concept of expanding your process scope, and you just saw a fully expanded process scope in the demo. You can gradually expand this, slowly introduce the items, and then the key here is that your developers will eventually come around over time because over time the job becomes easier. The job becomes easier because you're going to 2 reasons. Number one, software quality is going to improve. Even if software quality is already good, it's going to get better. And as a developer, that makes you happy. You're happy when your stakeholders are happy. You're happy when you get to work on features more than you work on bugs. And the second thing is release becomes easier. So yes, when you're in development mode, you just want to rush through and have fun and develop as much as you can and move on to the next story, move on to the next story. You don't want to worry about all this process. But then, switching back again, when you come to the traditional release time, We developers, we hate release time. We hate it because you're now forcing us to do all that work that we didn't want to do all that time. In the new process, as developers learn that, as we learn that releasing is easier, releasing is faster, it is not a burden. You will get buy-in. So that's the message of that question. You will get buy-in from your developers as they experience the benefits of doing this.
Great, thank you so much. I hope that these questions got a good answer.
It was a loaded question, but a fair question.
It was. I also added your calendar link into the chat so that if the question needs more elaboration, then you can do that in a one-to-one call with people. So we have a few more questions about how to handle requirements and data retention in Jira. For data retention, I know that there are like specific apps on Jira. So this could work for you, but let the requirements management side also to you, Aaron, if you want to explain a little bit more on the requirements management side.
Yeah, the requirements management is also just another demo all on its own, of course. But I'll give you the fast answer. There's two things you want to do to make requirements management easier inside Jira. So you do want to maintain your traditional specification requirements inside Jira. This is how you can create the traceability with your hazards, with your test evidence, with everything. And to organize them, there's different apps available. I'm going to show you an example of the app that I personally prefer. There's other apps if you don't want to use the app that I'm using. I use an app called Structure. Been around for a long time, and you can see how using Structure, I'm able to build a hierarchy, a meaningful hierarchy of my Jira, of my requirements inside Jira, right? So I can have features that break down into user requirements, that break down into functional requirements, and so forth, and have a nice browsable, organized specification. But just like in the risk demo, this is a living document. So just like the risk register inside Risk Manager Plus is a living document that will change every day as you work, this changes every day as you work. Then for the compliance side of things, you're going to use a reporting tool. Whether it's there's all sorts of reporting tools available. You'll use a reporting tool to generate a traditional specification document that you can then route for approval. So you can either report directly out of Jira, just like you can report your risk table directly out of Jira for traditional requirements management. I use if you're using X-Ray for testing, then X-Ray already has some built-in reporting tools that'll help you report on your requirements. You can use other tools from the Atlassian marketplace to do that reporting. You can do that, and likewise in Confluence, you can create a table of your requirement specification inside Confluence and then route that for approval alongside your risk table, and that'll give you a snapshot of these are all the approved requirements implemented in the system at the time of this release, whether those requirements were implemented in this release or were already implemented in older releases. This is the current specification at that time. So this would be, instead of a risk table, it would be a requirements table, a long requirements table. You take a snapshot of that and you route that for approval. And then your team has its living document that it can use for its day-to-day work, and your QA has its baseline approved snapshot for auditing releases over time.
Very good. I've actually seen live our customers showing us the requirement table built inside using the Risk Management Manager plus risk table view with tens and thousands of requirements captured there and all linked with everything that needs to be captured. We are over time already. I have to say, I'm so sorry about this. It's such an interesting conversation. I wish we could go on, really, but we need to end it today. There was an important question in the Q&A that we need to touch as well regarding validation of Jira. So So this is kind of the question, how you propose, what is the validation burden if we want to use Jira this way, or do we validate Confluence only because this is the reporting repository?
In my system, validate both, and that's something that I can help people with. So if you want to ask me a more detailed presentation of how to go about validating Jira Cloud and Confluence, then do that. But I use both because in this strategy, it is an integrated system of record. What do I mean by that? So using this as an example, right? So here's my risk hazard. This table was snapshotted and approved in Confluence. So Confluence is a system of record, of course. But if I click into this, this takes me to a Jira item, and I have more detailed history inside this Jira item. So Jira is also a system of record. So you kind of create an integrated system of record. Even if you're doing a traditional, not using Confluence, and you're using a traditional document management system, you want to use Jira as a low level system of record, because you're not going to export your audit trail. There's so much detail, there's so much good and useful audit data inside Jira that you don't want to have to export to Confluence or PDF. You need an entire encyclopedia, volumes of volumes of encyclopedias of exports to snapshot all that stuff. It's better to just leave it in Jira and control it in Jira with regulated workflows and signatures, and that's why you sort of see the processes that you have. And so if anybody wants a deeper dive into how to configure Jira, how to validate Jira using a GAMP5 compliant validation strategy on the cloud application, those are all things that I have a lot of experience helping companies with. Schedule a call, and I'm happy to talk with you for free and give you some pointers on where to go.
Very good. And for everybody who's still here, I acknowledge that some of you might need to go to next meeting, or because the full hour is 5 minutes over. But we are planning together with Aaron as well, the GAMP5 software tool validation approach to host a webinar on this quite a wide topic as well. So looking forward to have this webinar maybe closer to September, because the summer months at least in Europe where we are somewhat slower. So thank you so much, everybody. Of course, Aaron, you are amazing. And please keep an eye on Aaron's YouTube channel as well, Jira for Life Sciences. This is where we met Aaron, additionally to Aaron being one of our customers, of course. But this is where we really saw that how deeply Aaron is getting into the life sciences requirements, and how he is helping other companies work in Jira and Confluence. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone,
today.
for bearing with me, staying to the end, and
no
even
worries.
over. And I'm so happy to finally do this with you, Monica, Marian. This